Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we mark the start of the second week of COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. As civil society policy experts, our role in these negotiations is both to shine a light on progress and to hold decision makers accountable for the commitments urgently needed to confront the climate crisis. This week is crucial for our commitments back home. Communities on the front lines of climate impacts are watching and waiting for tangible commitments that go beyond rhetorical. Ministers are also here to get the job done, but we need to get it done in the right way. At the heart of this COP is the new collective and quantified goal, the NCQG, on climate finance. This goal must represent real ambition, equity, and transformative action. We now have a 25-page document with the elements we would like to see in the final decision, but also with very problematic options that go against the foundations of the Paris Agreement. We've also not seen progress from other work streams that are meant to keep the 1.5 alive. The mitigation work program, despite having a good informant note, has only ended up with procedural conclusion, not agreed text. Another major focus is whether a cover decision can play a meaningful role. There are mixed signals. Some parties are advocating for a cover decision to consolidate key mitigation and adaptation elements, while others hesitate, wary of empty promises, but under-deliver. For many, including marginalized communities, a cover decision could provide much needed space to elevate underrepresented communities and issues such as children's rights, disability inclusion, and the right to health. From a mitigation perspective, a cover decision might be essential to maintain momentum on fossil fuel phase-outs and ambitious climate goals. Yet, it's also delicate. Success depends on genuine buy-in from all parties, including high ambition and low ambition states, alike. Positively, there is some progress. There are 12 mentions related to tackling fossil fuels in the draft text on the NCQG and the mitigation work program released late Friday afternoon. Notably, paragraph 337 of the mitigation work program highlights the energy transition as a formal work stream that UNFCCC negotiations must address moving forward, a long-awaited institutionalization of this critical issue. Additionally, the first mention of fossil fuel phase-out in Brazil NDC, a relatively NDC from the UK, the European Commission partnership with the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, and finally the G77, resistance to a weak NCQG text, all indicate that this COP might indeed offer a credible pathway to transition away from fossil fuels. With that background, let's turn to our esteemed speakers who are here to reflect on week one and where we want to be by the time we all leave Baku. To begin, let's start hearing from Fadet Kaboub, a senior advisor at PowerShift Africa. So what, in your view, makes a successful NCQG at this stage of the negotiations?
Thank you. Good morning. The focus here is on not just the quantity of finance, but on the quality. On the quantity, we're talking we need trillions, not billions. And this is not just some random numbers that people come up with. There are scientific basis for this. We have a carbon budget. Some countries have exceeded their carbon budget, and therefore they've accumulated a climate debt. And the concept of debt in economics and law and finance is very straightforward. If I owe you $100, I pay you $100. We can negotiate a payment plan, but at the end of the day, I pay you $100, but you don't have to give me anything in return. Instead, unfortunately, climate finance so far has been, instead of me giving you $100, I give you $3 and I tell you what to do with it. And then I lend you $7, sometimes with concessional loans, sometimes not, and I tell you what to do with it. And then I give you $10, but you have to give me your forest to offset my pollution. And then I give you another $20, but you have to produce green hydrogen for me, not for you. And you're looking at me and saying, where's my $100? Where's the debt payment? So we need to reset the conversation about climate finance. In terms of the trillions, the sub-Saharan African region alone is owed $45 trillion in climate debt, cumulative climate debt, between now and 2050. So the billions don't actually, cut it. And we have to be very serious about moving to trillions as quickly as possible, starting here in Baku. And in terms of the quality of finance, when we're talking about climate finance from a global south perspective, from an African perspective in particular, climate finance is development finance. There is no separation. So we're talking about new, additional, and non-debt inducing climate finance, meaning climate finance needs to come in the form of grants, not loans and further economic entrapment. It needs to come in the form of debt cancellation of all climate-related debts, because that's not the responsibility of the Global South to go out and borrow money and get deeper into debt to deal with the economic and devastating consequences of climate change that was caused by emissions primarily in the Global North. And number three, and most importantly, transfer of life-saving technologies to allow us to manufacture and deploy the renewable energy infrastructure that we need, the clean cooking infrastructure that we need, and the clean transportation infrastructure that we need, the building blocks of development and prosperity and resilience. So this is in terms of the quality and the quantity. And why we're linking development and climate finance as part of the pathway forward, because the root causes of climate inaction, or the lack of climate inaction, lack of adaptation in the Global South, is that we have no fiscal policy space. Because some of our countries, 50% of export revenues go towards paying the debt, external debt. And the root causes of external debt in the Global South are food imports, energy imports, and manufactured high value-added product imports. So we have to channel all the climate and development finance towards food sovereignty and agroecology, which is a climate solution and a development solution, towards renewable energy sovereignty, which is a climate solution and a development solution, and finally towards high value-added green industrialization to manufacture and deploy the building blocks of development and prosperity. Again, a climate solution and a development solution. So we want transformation, we want real action, we don't want more of the delays and the tranquilizing drugs of gradualism and incrementalism and false solutions and dangerous distractions. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadel. So now we move to our two other speakers, Catherine Abreu, Director at International Climate Politics Hub, and Andreas Sieber, Associate Director of Global Policy and Campaigns at 350.org. So building on Fadel's insights, could you please elaborate on the state of play in the negotiations with a particular focus on climate mitigation and energy? And I will start with Andreas.
Thanks very much. Building on the super helpful framing and context from Fadel, what are actually the issues here as we go into week 2? We see 4 iterations of text on the new finance goal. That is where we want to see that delivery. But all these iterations have been technical. So the large issues are outstanding for ministers to come in week 2. That is normal process. We have not expected these issues to be resolved in week 1. Those issues are the quantum, how much money. Secondly, quality, what kind of money, as Fadel mentioned, right? And thirdly, also the structure of that goal. Where does the money go to? We want it to go to loss and damage, adaptation, and mitigation, and that is clear. We see ministers coming in to solve these issues. There are references, in particular to energy, that reference the global stocktake, paragraph 28, that landmark decision of last year to transition away from fossil fuels and to triple renewable energy. There's also one problematic paragraph, currently 123, that references fossil fuel investment. We think that needs to go out. But basically what we see, the game is up, right? So let's see what ministers do with that. I want to just briefly mention that later today at 2 p.m. we have a study coming out basically underpinning what Fadel just said, doing a grant equivalent estimate of the climate finance needs and basically showing in peer-reviewed Nature Climate Action that the ask of civil society of 1 trillion is needs-based. It's not something that comes out of thin air, and we challenge some of the assumptions. of the high-level panel on climate finance. And from my perspective, that just means, right, we cannot view the high-level panel's paper as kind of the ceiling of things, but rather as a bottom. On mitigation, the Rule 16 was mentioned, so we have no text going forward on the mitigation work program for now. We had a lot of good things in there, in particular building on last year's global stocktake. There was a suggestion to actually task the next COP with, if NDCs don't add up to what we need, 1.5, that there needs to be a COP decision in Brazil to respond to that we have a place to discuss the energy transition. All that was mentioned in the mitigation work program. That went to Rule 16, thanks to some pretty strong resistance from countries such as Saudi Arabia and a few others. We saw over 130 countries in plenary on Saturday demand that there is a way forward, starting with the OSIS and LDCs, the most vulnerable climate countries. They need to hold the line on 1.5, but also many others, the EU, the US, and so on and so forth. And we can have our thoughts about some of them being hypocrites in expanding fossil fuels themselves. But I think it's clear that we need to way forward from here. And the last bit I'm going to close with to say, if the presidency is serious about mitigation, they need to listen to this vast majority of the world, if over 130 countries are vocal in plenary and need to provide a way forward.
Thanks, colleagues. I'm Catherine Abreu, the director of the International Climate Politics Hub, a global network of organizations working in the climate diplomacy space. So as my colleagues have said, while we do have some options on the table and expect political and ministerial conversations to move forward on the NCQG this week, we've seen gridlock across many of the other rooms, in particular when it comes to the mitigation outcomes. So Rule 16 applied in the mitigation work program, little progress made in the Just Transition work program, and questions of where the historic decision last year to transition away from fossil fuels, triple renewable energy, and double energy efficiency will land in the outcomes of this COP just 1 year later. That is a critical question. It is imperative that countries make progress on the commitments that they make in these spaces. We cannot afford to backtrack on the commitment to address the cause of the climate crisis, which is coal, oil, and gas, and rapidly transition away from fossil fuels toward clean energy. We're also seeing backtracking, the risk of backtracking on issues such as the Gender Action Plan, with some parties pushing up against language enshrining the human rights and the rights of Indigenous peoples. So while we rightly focus our attention on NCQG, it is critical that we make progress on the necessary climate finance to meet the scale of needs that's required on climate mitigation and adaptation. We can't lose sight of the other items of the package that do also need to move forward. Today, we're expecting to hear from the presidency what their plan is to help unlock these blockages. So the presidency needs to be laying out an ambitious and aggressive plan to make sure that ministers are being brought to the table for necessary political conversations, and that the ministerial pairs that they have tasked with carrying forward some of these political conversations will be deployed effectively to make sure we land with a good outcome at the end of week 2, whether that outcome lives under the agenda items or in a potential cover decision. I just want to mention something that's happening outside of this space, but will be giving important signals back into COP29. G20 leaders, of course, are meeting in Rio as we speak. Well, they're probably sleeping as we speak, but they'll soon be beginning their meetings. And again, reiterating those outcomes from the global stocktake text to transition away from fossil fuels and build the capacity of the clean, renewable energy future has to be a central figure in the outcomes at the G20, along with positive signals coming from the world's wealthiest nations that they are willing to put money on the table when it comes to climate finance, and that they're willing to engage seriously in conversations about reforms needed to the international financial architecture, some of which Fidel has mentioned. So we're looking as well to the G20 to see what signals that sends back into this process, and on Wednesday how those signals get picked up and land in the final outcomes here at COP29.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Andreas. So now we open the floor for questions.
No, my name is Claudia Antunes. I am a journalist from Brazil. It's more a clarification, and I'm asking from Andreas. You referred to the text of the finance document. I didn't understand what you said about excluding investments in oil and gas from the count of the money to be delivered.
Thank you. I think we can take another question and then we can answer. Yes, please. Here. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Vivian Chime, Climate Home News. I wanted to find out, with the Rule 16 applied for the mitigation work program, what happens to other parts of the draft of the text that mentions, deforestation and other areas that need to be addressed? If we move this to next year, what happens to addressing these other areas because of, the language on fossil fuels? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with Andreas.
Thanks for the clarification question. So basically, there's a lot of good stuff in the text right now, including building on last year's decision, but there's one paragraph I mentioned, 123, that opens the door for continued fossil fuel investment. And I would say the language is pretty unclear to say in saying that fossil fuel finance needs to be seized. We need to reduce fossil fuels by 55% by 2035, according to the IEA, to be in line with 1.5. So that paragraph, I have it in front of me, it calls to reduce investment and flows towards fossil fuels infrastructure, but acknowledges that some needs are still there, but I think we just need to be crystal clear that the path is out of fossil fuels, that we need to reduce it, and that paragraph is far too vague, and therefore we see it as dangerous. But again, there's many options in there. We will see significant changes. So it's just one element and not the big issues that I mentioned as well.
And just to answer the other question, so that's on the NCQG draft. Unfortunately, while we did have some decent elements in the mitigation work program draft text from the subsidiary bodies, because of the Rule 16, that text will not be forwarded to the CMA. So it is now up to the presidency and the parties whether they take up conversations on the mitigation work program and other mitigation elements under the CMA, which we enter into in this second week of negotiations. That is a large part of what we're looking to hear from the presidency and the parties on the floor of the stock-taking plenary today.
Thank you so much. Any other question? Yes, please.
So many of you referred to a cover decision. Could you specify what you expect to be in that cover decision, since there is this risk of the mitigation program going out of the negotiations from here? And well, specifically this, what a cover decision was supplying in terms of the gaps in the decision properly.
Thank you. Yes, please, another question. We can take two. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Igor Paunovic from UNCTAD. My question is, we've heard where we are at the moment, but what is your sense of the political possibilities to actually get to some decent outcome at this COP?
Thank you. So, yes, Kat?
Sure, I'll say a few words. I'm sure everyone has something to contribute on these questions. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, the presidency and the parties have a responsibility to dedicate their political capacity to moving forward on the agenda items as decided at the beginning of this conference. And that means, really focusing resources on moving forward discussions on the NCQG and finding places in the negotiations this week to move other agenda items forward. If we are in a place where those other agenda items are not moving forward, then we do have to start talking about a cover decision to create a home for the progress on those pieces to live. But whether the conversation around a cover text gets opened is frankly up to the presidency and the parties. We did hear several parties last week throughout the SB negotiations start calling for a cover decision, and so we'll see whether those same parties raise the concern and start calling for a cover decision again this week. But those conversations will definitely be informed by the positioning of the ministers as they arrive here in Baku. In terms of the possibility for a strong political outcome, it's my sense that parties are here to get to work. While we have, of course, been encountering a lot of demoralizing narratives in the outside discourse with the US presidential elections and some of the rhetoric coming from Trump, and of course, what we've heard from Milei in Argentina, overall, there is a sense that there's affirmation and commitment to the direction of travel. And I think parties are genuinely here to find some good outcomes, particularly when it comes to the new climate finance pledge. I think what we need to be reminding them as civil society is that finance has to be the priority. This is the finance COP. And we also need to be clear on what the finance is moving toward. And so making sure that there are references to and progress on all the other agenda items, including mitigation and adaptation, and linking that to the full package of the finance outcomes has to be the priority for political players here this week.
You have something? Yeah, okay.
Just one small additional comment. I mean, one aspect that made me quite hopeful in week one was, I would say, what I would call some rallying of troops of progressive alliances. Namely, we saw that the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance was joined by the European Commission and to some extent by Brazil. And we saw the High Ambition Coalition that was central to land 1.5 in Paris, that was central for the Paris Agreement we have, in much stronger shape than last year. So I think last year we had around 12 countries or something in the statement, and this year we have over 25. We have the European Union back, we have Germany back, we have Canada back. We understand the UK was at least part of the discussion, so, and they said they need to follow up from the global stocktake plus the trillions that Fadel mentioned. I think like that language on trillions that needs a lot of unpacking, but that makes me hopeful that there is collaboration between these countries, and they are the ones we need to look for, in particular the vulnerable nations that led us to 1.5 and to the transition away from fossil fuels.
Thank you. We still have 5 minutes. We can take one last question, please. If not, then thank you. Thank you so much.